Okay, we're going to take a look at the block war games and their place in the wargaming hobby. And right off the bat you might say, hey, wait a minute, Lee Moves North, that's not a block war game. No, it isn't. But I'm going to show it in comparison to the first block war game, Quebec 1759, to show us what the hobby was like in 1972, 73 or so, and see why the block games are so innovative. Where they've moved to, the good about them, the bad, the ugly, and their place in the hobby. Now, to understand the block war games' place in the hobby, we have to take a look at a game from the early 70s. Now, I've chosen Lee Moves North by SPI, produced in 1973. And I'm not taking a backhanded slap at the game or anything like that. I actually like Lee Moves North. But the SPI games of that period featured kind of bland maps, but they were very functional. Avalon Hill had maps that were a bit more colorful, but they were still tied very much to the hex grid. And counters of that period also were kind of bland but functional. So for example, here you had the 12-5 Union Corps unit, a 4-6, a Confederate unit, and leader units like Robert E. Lee, a 15-6. They were simple counters, but very functional. The first number was often the combat value, and the second number was the movement factor. So that was kind of the way a lot of the war games looked in 1972-73. Some were more colorful than others, but that was generally what games were like. Very few games used the square grid by that time. For those of you who saw my review of the 64 version of Avalon Hill's Gettysburg, you'll realize that game had a square grid. Square grids were not very popular in the 70s. Nearly everybody was using the hexagon grid. So when the first block war game came along, it was quite an innovation. And let's take a look at that. Oh, one more thing before getting to the block games. Games of that period used a combat results table, usually with a 6-sided die, and you'd compare odds, roll a die, and that would give you your combat results. Of course, every game had its own table, and there were many variations. But that was generally the way things worked in the 70s. Combat results table with a die, often a 6-sider. I guess there were some games using 2 dice at a time. So now let's take a look at the first block war game. Now in 1972, most of the games I was playing back then were Civil War. That was mainly my thing. And I was downtown in Ottawa here on Bank Street, and I spotted this game called Quebec 1759. It had a store called Crazy Eddie's. No longer exists. And the title just freaked me out because, what? Quebec 1759? A Canadian subject? On one of the most famous Canadian battles in history? Man, I've got to get this thing. And in those days, especially with the packaging there, you had to buy the game pretty well on faith, because all you had was a neat cover artwork, the title, and nothing else about the game on the outside. What was the map like? What were the counters like? The hobby press was not as advanced as it was today. We certainly didn't have the internet. So you had to buy this thing on faith, which I did. I think it was like 1995 back then. So let's try to recreate what I saw back in 1972 when I first opened the game. Now when I first opened the game, I really freaked out. And what got me the most was the map. It was absolutely beautiful. And I looked at it and said, well, hey, where's the grid? There's no square grid, no hexagon grid. How the devil do you move the counters? And the counters themselves were wood. Now this really freaked me out, because counters at that time, of course, were always cardboard, and some of our games we'd played so much we wore them out. So these little wooden pieces that were indestructible was just so innovative. It just freaked me out. And you got the very simple rule booklets. I won't even say booklet, almost a pamphlet, just a couple of pages and a historical commentary. So I just wanted to dive into this game. Now, I should point out something about these counters, and I'm going to try to zoom in and show them better. Now, unfortunately, this is not the edition from 1972. This game has evolved quite a bit. You can tell this is a later edition from several things. One, it features little wee gold little dots to show the strength of the men. The original game, the white dots were painted on in white paint. I remember that quite distinctly. Also, the Indian unit was the same color as the French units, the blue. The later editions changed them to green to give them to distinguish them from other units. And in fact, the later editions have 2 Indian units. So there has been an evolution in this game. Now, of course, in the modern games, they don't even paint the little dots on the counters anymore. They've gone to stickers. So you can see that to produce a game like this would be a lot of work, and the production of the game itself has altered over the years. These are the ship counters, same kind of thing, brown with embossed pictures of the ships on them. So the counters were very innovative at the time, and they're virtually indestructible. They won't wear out. Another thing I missed from the original game are the historical designations of the counters. Now, Wolf's men, the regiments in blue, were always just numbered, because that's the way British regiments were named. They're just numbered. For example, the 28th Regiment there in the back. But the original game, instead of just having an L on it, it had the full name of the unit, which was the Louisbourg Grenadiers. And the M unit for the French originally was Troupe de la Marine, and they were on there before. I kind of missed those. And here we have the Q, which in the original game was the Quebec Militia. So there have been some compromises in quality over the years for the units. But then I'm getting away from the block games themselves. This is generic to Quebec 1759, not all block games. But what was different about block games compared to board war games at the time? Okay, the big advantage of the block war games at the time was the hidden intelligence aspect of the game. For example, you were the British player, and you had 4 regiments here based at the little village of Lévis. Opposite the St. Lawrence River there on the basin, you have 5 French regiments based at the village of Beauport. But as you can see, you can't tell how large those units are, nor can you even tell what units are there. The unit might even be a dummy, no strength at all. So that was one of the great strengths of the block war games at that time, hidden intelligence. Now, board war games of the time had those features too, but they couldn't do it as effectively. Here was a simple method of limited intelligence, and it worked. The other innovation at the time was built-in step reduction. Now, board war games had this too, but they couldn't do it as effectively because they had to have a whole bunch of replacement counters. Here, for the first time, in one counter, you could show step reduction. So if the 28th Regiment took casualties, originally it was a 4, took casualties, it could be reduced to a 3. If it took more casualties, it could be reduced to a 1. And if it took even more, it could be reduced even more. And eventually, if it took casualties after it became a 1, it would be removed from the board. So this was a good step reduction system built right into the game. The big strength of the block games was the intelligence and the step reduction system. Okay, the other plus, and some could say minus, of the block games was freeing themselves from the inhibitions of the hex grid and the hexagon grid. Here there was no grid at all. And the movement was kind of neat. It was point to point, and you just merely moved from, let's say, Lévis, marched along that road, to Etchemin. So you moved from named point to named point on the board. So an army could march from Sillery, for example, just to Quebec. It was simple, but it was effective. And that movement system certainly worked for Quebec 1759. as General Wolfe's options with his army based on the island of Orleans, he didn't have a lot of options. Now, he did have the Navy to move his army, and he could do amphibious landings on various spots on the coast. But getting rid of the hexagon grid made an entirely different kind of game. Another innovation at the time was the battle system, which didn't use a combat results table at all. What happened was the defender set up in 3 lines, and then the attacker set up in 3 lines. And this simulated the right flank, middle, and left flank of any army at the time. So let's say we had a situation like this, where Wolfe lands 4 British regiments on the village of Lévis, and the French is defending with 5 units. What would happen is the French would set up first, deploying their 3 lines, right, left, and center, and the British would then deploy his lines, right, left, and center. And after doing that, the units would be exposed. So you didn't really know what you're up against until the actual battle. Now, the mechanics of the game always had the defender fire first. So in this case, the troupe de la marine would have 3 dice to throw, and they would roll, and if they got a 6, they would inflict 1 hit on the British unit there. You say, well, what's so innovative about that? Well, we take all this stuff for granted, but remember, these were the days when all the combat games were using combat results table. So here was a simple way of not having to look a table up at all. Just roll the dice, and away you went. After he fired, the next unit would fire down the line, and next, and so on. The defender always firing first and having the advantage. So if he inflicted casualties on the attacker, of course Wolfe would have less dice to throw in his turn. So they were simulating kind of 18th century conflict where the defender had a slight advantage in the sense that he fired first. Was it simple? Yeah, it was simple, all right. And we're going to get into the advantages and disadvantages of that system in a moment. Now, with such a tactical system, they could add all kinds of little nuances to make the game more fun, more historical. Let's say that the troupe de la marine here smashed out the right flank of the British. Let's say they destroy this unit. Well, in the next turn, that unit, the troupe de la marine, would be able to fire double dice against these units in the center, kind of simulating the outflanking and stuff. So it was a cute little innovative way of showing tactics at the time. Simple, of course, but it was something new, and we enjoyed it at the time. Okay, what are some of the disadvantages of the system? Well, let's say, for example, the 45th Regiment has 400 men, and it's represented by 4 little blocks or dots. And let's say that unit, they mention it G, I think that's the French regiment in Guyenne, had 300 men. So they show it with 3 dots. So the dots could represent a certain number of men. But what it could not represent was really quality. For example, let's say the Louisbourg Grenadiers, which nominally has 300 men, is against the Guyenne, that also has 300 men. But what if the Louisbourg Grenadiers is an elite unit, and actually better than the regiment Guyenne? There was no qualitative way of showing that it was better in the game. Each rolled 3 dice. So that was one of the disadvantages of the early system. It was simple, but it couldn't accommodate the nuances of a sophisticated order of battle. Now we're going to see in the later games how this was handled, how it improved. So the games themselves did evolve. I'm just trying to show you the disadvantages of the block system. Okay, this is just another example to illustrate my point, how the games couldn't really accommodate a sophisticated order of battle. Now, at the Battle on the Plains of Abraham, the 47th Regiment, the Lascelles Regiment, had about 360 men. It was under a Colonel Hale. The 78th Regiment, which is the Fraser Highlanders, had 662 men, and both were good British line regiments. But, as you can see in the game, both are represented by a 4. Now, fair enough. They're both British regiments. They're both good. And that worked fine overall for the game system. I'm just illustrating as a point that the game couldn't accommodate, well, just a more sophisticated order of battle. 78th really should be higher strength or have abilities that the 47th does not have. And herein we have another disadvantage of the block system because of the base 4. I mean, there's only 4 sides to a block, right? So they really had to begin with 4 and go from there. Now, there have been changes in the game, as I said. We're going to get to those later. But this is, after all, the first game, the first block war game, and we're going back in time here to 72. I'm just showing you the disadvantages of the block system and what it can and can't do. So the strength of the block system is the hidden intelligence, getting rid of the grid, and the built-in combat reduction system. Those are the big pluses of the block war games. Not much else to say about the original block war game, except that it's still in print. I mean, the old Gamma 2 company is now Columbia. This game is still produced by them. And if I could leave a war game after me 40 years after I've gone, I'd be quite happy. So this was the father of the block war games, still in print, still popular, and I think that's a nice tribute to a very fine game on still an obscure topic. I don't think anyone has done a Quebec 1759 game since. So let's take a look at some of the more modern block games and see how they've developed. Okay, one more thing before I leave Quebec 1759. If anyone can tell me the source of that artwork, I would love to know it, because that artwork for that original edition has always intrigued me. I've looked through all kinds of 7 Years of War books and French and Indian War, and I just can't find the source of this picture. It's obviously not 7 Years War. You can tell by the style of the uniforms. It looks more almost War of 1812. And it's just for my personal interest. I just love the artwork. If anyone could identify that piece of art, I'd love to hear from them. So let's take a look at 2 other block war games. Okay, we're going to look briefly at Julius Caesar by Columbia and Hellenes by GMT. And we're not going to do an in-depth look at these 2 games. Remember, we're trying to just show a history of how block war games developed. Now, Hellenes came out before Julius Caesar, but I'm going to look at Julius Caesar first because it's the simpler of the 2, and it's just to show you where the system has evolved. Okay, what does a block game look like 40 years later? Well, you still have the nice cover artwork, as I pointed out, for Julius Caesar. You still have very nice, colorful maps, although now they're not mounted. This is thicker stock than usual, but it's not mounted like Quebec 1759. Board games being the very expensive creatures they are to produce, there has been compromises. So a lot of the maps are no longer mounted. We still get the nice glitzy units, and I'll show them in a minute. And we've got a new formula now, cards, which changes the combat and movement system. Well, let's take a look at the counters. Okay, gone forever are the combat values embossed into the unit. They've been replaced now with decals, which the consumer has to apply himself. And they have to be applied carefully, unless you put them on crooked or tear them. Plus you have to get your color matches right. But I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit closer if I can to show you the new information that is on the counters. Okay, I think that's as close as I can get, but you get the idea. Here we have the Julius Caesar counter, and you can see some new information on there. You can still see the 3, the 2, and the 1 in Roman numerals, indicating the number of step losses he can take. You've got his name, of course, and a nice illustration. Now in the upper right you have something new, a letter and a number, A3. There were 3 letters on the counters, A, B, and C, and various numbers. A3 meant that Caesar fires first in any combat. A units fire first over B, and 3 indicate the number he needs on the dice to get a hit. Now that's more sophisticated than the old Quebec 1759. Remember, no matter what unit you had in those days, you only hit with a 6. So let's compare Caesar to, let's say, Antonius, we'll say. Antonius is rated as an A2 unit. So he would fire first in any combat, and he'd hit on a 1 or 2. You notice that Antonius only has 2 steps. Here's 2 of Pompey's units. You can see a lot more information there. You've got names of towns on there, Tarraco and Ravenna. Upper right you've got C2 and C3, which means that C units would fire after A units and fire after B units. The Ravenna Legion would hit on a 1, 2, or 3. The Tarraco Legion would hit on a 1 or 2. In the upper left, you've got some more information giving the historical designation of the Legion. So you can see the counters have evolved. They're a lot more sophisticated. You can get more information on them. Plus, you can get innovative and add neat counters like, well, there's good old Cleopatra. She's a C1, she fires last, she only hits on a 1, but she is in the game. So that's the way the counters have evolved. Of course, they're still one-sided, so you still have the hidden movement aspect of the game. Now this particular game added cards for movement and raising new troops. I won't get into the combat and movement system itself of Julius Caesar. That's not the point of this particular video. It's to show you the evolution of block war games. And you can see they have evolved. They've gotten more sophisticated, they've improved on the old Quebec 1759 system. But, apologies there, we have a very assertive bird in the background. That's our pet bird. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, the block games being more sophisticated. Well, they are. You can see that they are getting better. Don't know what else to say about them. I just can't think of what else has evolved. Combat system, well, it was similar to Quebec 1759, although they got rid of the right, left, and middle flank kind of thing. Now what was far more important was the quality of the unit, whether it was A, B, or C. Now note also that they'll get the order of battle has evolved, it still has some of the inherent disadvantages, which I'll show again. Okay, here's another pairing of units to show you again how the system has evolved. Over on the left you've got a cavalry unit with a size of 2, and on the right a legion with a size of 4, and it's only C2 quality. So you can see now you can do a little bit more sophisticated orders of battle. You can show cavalry units. Okay, as I was pointing out, the counters had evolved to the point where they could show some differences between, let's say, cavalry on the left there and infantry on the right through the use of the symbols. The eagle symbol there for the legion and mounted horsemen for cavalry. And they could show again differences in quality. C2 for that particular legion and B3 for that particular cavalry unit. And they could show historical designations, like the 17th Legion. Now as the block games evolved, as I mentioned, you could now show the quality difference between various units. For example, this legion, the 10th Legion, was actually an elite legion, and I always thought it was kind of curious that it's only rated as a C unit, but that would be a judgment by the designer. I would have made maybe the 10th Legion a B. But what he's done is he's made his auxiliary units, let's say A units, I guess to show that they fire first, the missile units, things like that. Anyway, these are design decisions. No criticism against the designer or the game, just to show you the way the block games have evolved. Because of this new information, the designer had more tools at his command now to develop the game. Now, I'll show you one of the disadvantages of the block system inherently too. For example, you could introduce navies into the game now, and you can see that they're rated quite low, D3 in this game. We're calling it the 4th Navy. It's only got 2 steps, rated D3. where the game can have a disadvantage is, well, how do I show this? Well, let's say you've got this Navy unit here at Syracuse. It's an enemy unit, okay, with its back to you. You don't know the size of the unit. The trouble is, you don't even know if it's a Navy unit. I mean, it could be an infantry unit or a Navy, right? I have a little bit of a problem with that. Intelligence at the time, you might not know what legion is at Syracuse or how large it was, but you would certainly know whether a Navy was there or not. So nobody has really addressed that problem with the block war games yet that I can see. I suppose there's a way of doing it, putting another little dot on the counter to show it's a Navy unit or something. There are ways around it. It's just I haven't seen any game address that problem yet. Point out a few things about the map. Again, because we are free of the hexagon grid and the square grid, and the artist has a bit more license, he can make his board look pretty good. For example, here the city of Syracuse, you see it's rated 1, and the towns can be given different numbers, of course, for different victory points. For example, Rome, and also affect winter quartering. So in the map art itself, you can begin to affect the game. There you have a straight square showing you crossing the Strait of Messina and Rhegium. You can change things with your little road system, the little dotted roads meaning one thing, and a solid road meaning something else. You can divide the sea areas up into various areas for sea movement. So the block system was capable of, doing some historical stuff too. Also, the symbols on the port. For example, there's a Navy symbol there, which meant Navy units can be created. Over here at Byzantium, you can see a cavalry unit. That means cavalry units can be produced there. So within the map itself, there was still a lot of historical information that could be included in a block war game. Okay, not much else to say about this particular game. Like I said, it's not a review of the game Julius Caesar itself. It's just meant to show how the block games have evolved. Julius Caesar is a fine game. I like it. It's a tournament at WBC every year in Lancaster. Is it a serious simulation of the Civil War between Caesar and Pompey? No, it is not. But it does have historical flavor. It's fun to play. And it's got some history in it. I think that's one of the pluses of the block war games. They are generally very good games, but inherently in the system, and no attack against the designer, there's only so many things you can do with the block games. And Julius Caesar does a fine game of producing a fun game based on that period. But I would not consider it to be a serious historical simulation. So we'll leave Julius Caesar now and take a look at one more game, Hellenes, produced by GMT. Okay, we're going to take a brief look at the game Hellenes by GMT. Now I've put the map under plastic to keep it flat. That's going to have inherent advantages and disadvantages. One of them, as you can see, is the glare from the light. I can't really prevent that. But I just wanted to show you the overall map. It's quite nice. It's still not mounted, but it is on thicker stock. It's a very nice map. And of course, Hellenes is about the Peloponnesian War. And we'll take a look at the units for that game. Okay, just a shot of the components there, still bagged. As you can see, there are a lot of counters in this game, quite a lot. And it is also, well, the new generation of card-driven games. You get a nice deck of cards, and very colorful counters, which we'll take a look at. Okay, here's some examples of units from Hellenes. To me, this shows really the ultimate evolution of the block war games. You still got the stickers, but now, of course, the stickers, they can get very innovative. You've got some very nice looking counters there. You've got the fleet units there from Sparta on the left, showing trireme, an aerial view. Corinthian squadron there, the orange one. And you've got Athenian units on the right. And you can see from the symbols, by the colors, you can indicate individual towns, type of unit. The combat information is what we've grown used to now. Still 2 steps for the navies. Corinth there, 2 steps. And there's a 3-step unit and a 2-step unit. So the step reduction works exactly the same as all the other block war games. It's just that you've got nice looking counters now with almost unlimited color choice, and just to make them look nice. I noticed that in this game the blocks are thinner, which is actually kind of nice. Easier to put more units on the same square. I don't know what else to say about Hellenes. It's a good game. I really like it. And this is getting away from the block war game theme, but the designer decided not to show the whole Peloponnesian War in one scenario. It's too difficult. So he's broken up the game into several scenarios, and they're more historical than I'd say a game like Julius Caesar. More work and research has gone into this game to give more history than in Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is a little generic for the Civil War. This one is a bit more sophisticated. So I'm trying to say that the block war games are capable of, doing a pretty good job of historical simulations of battles and campaigns and wars. But again, they have that inherent disadvantage of the way the block system works. Now here I mean, of course, the disadvantage inherent to the system of the base 4. 4 sides to a block, therefore each counter can really only be a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. And the letters can, be A, B, C, D for quality. Now you've got a heck of a lot of variation there. You can do a lot. But you are limited by the counter mix. Now, where the games can shine is now where you can add events with cards. Of course, the card-driven games have changed our hobby considerably, and that would be a whole video unto itself. I won't get into that, but just saying that I point the cards out because card-driven games are now married to the block system too. They can accommodate each other. So that's my look at block war games. We've gone back in time, actually, from the 18th century, Quebec 1759, to Hellenes. Again, Quebec 1759, produced in 1972, and Hellenes produced in 2009. So that's my basic take on block war games. I do like them. They're fun. They're simple to play. Often 2 hours or under is sufficient to play them. But I think they have limited ability to recreate history. Well, that's okay too. I mean, I like my historical war games. They're more complicated and take longer to play. But I just wanted to show the evolution of block war games, and I hope I succeeded in that. And that's it.